There's a version of that dinner where I raise my voice. I've imagined it. But the version that actually happened was quieter than that. And quieter, I've learned, is the one that wins. I remember the tablecloth was white, slightly starched, the kind that catches every crumb and every stain. I remember the restaurant was his choice, not mine. The same one where he'd celebrated 3 different promotions that never quite materialized into anything. I remember I ordered the salmon and didn't eat it. What I remember most is the folder. Manila, unlabeled, sitting under my purse for 40 minutes while he talked about a client, a deadline, a conference he had coming up. I let him finish. I always let him finish. Then I opened the folder, took out 1 page, and slid it across the tablecloth until it stopped in front of his water glass. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I just watched the color leave his face in the same order it always does. Forehead first, then jaw, then his hands, which stopped moving entirely. The room number added up, I said. That's all. 4 words. I didn't tell him which room, which hotel, which week, or whose names were attached to it. I didn't have to. He already knew. I could see it arriving in his eyes page by page, like a statement he'd been dreading for months. What I hadn't told him yet was how long I'd been keeping the books, or just how carefully. I don't yell. I never have. My whole life, when something didn't add up, I didn't scream about it. I went back through the numbers until I found where it broke. This is a story about a marriage that stopped balancing long before I understood why. It's about 3 women, 3 vacations, and 3 photographs, posted months apart by people who never knew each other existed, each one holding a piece of the same puzzle without realizing it. By the end, all 3 pieces fit together. But first, you need to know who I was before I started counting. My name is Rachel, and for 14 years I've been a forensic accountant. People hear that title and imagine something dramatic: courtrooms, subpoenas, men in suits sweating across a table from me. Mostly, it's quieter than that. Mostly, it's spreadsheets. It's finding the one row where a number should be $40,000 and is instead 38, and asking why. Companies hire me when something feels wrong, but nobody can say exactly what. I find the seam. I always find the seam. I used to think that made me careful in every part of my life. I organized our bills by due date. I flagged our joint account if it dipped more than $100 from what I expected. I could tell you, without looking, what our mortgage payment did to our balance on the 3rd of every month. What I never once did in 12 years of marriage was audit my husband's calendar. It's funny, in the way things are only funny after you understand them. I reconciled other people's books for a living, caught executives skimming 5% off vendor contracts, found a hospital administrator quietly overbilling Medicare by rerouting a handful of codes, and I never thought to apply any of that rigor to David. Not because I trusted blindly, because I didn't think of him as a ledger. He was my husband. You don't audit someone you love. You just believe them. That's what I told myself anyway, until a Tuesday in March, when he texted me from what he said was a hotel bar in Denver. Slow night, client canceled, ordering room service, heading to bed early. Nothing about that message was strange on its own, except that 20 minutes earlier, he'd texted me a photo from what he called the conference lobby, marble floors, a fountain, a chandelier I didn't recognize from any hotel chain his company usually booked. Denver conferences, in my experience of 4 years of them, did not happen in buildings that looked like that. I didn't say anything. I didn't ask. I just did what I do at work when a number looks slightly off before I know why. I filed it away, and I kept watching. Once I started paying attention, I couldn't stop, and once I couldn't stop, I saw how long the pattern had actually been running. The trips had started small, 1 a quarter, back when David got promoted to regional sales manager and needed, or said he needed, to put a face to the accounts. By that March, they'd crept to 1 every 5 or 6 weeks. Denver, then Charlotte, then Denver again. Always the same tier of hotel, the kind with a name like a compass direction, 3.5 stars, a lobby designed to look expensive from 10 feet away and cheap from 5. Always described the same vague way. A few meetings, client dinner, nothing exciting. He was never dishonest about the leaving. That part, I'll give him. He always kissed me goodbye at the door, always said it the same way. Miss you already before I've even left. Like it was a line he'd practiced in front of a mirror until it sounded spontaneous. He texted goodnight from every trip. He asked about our daughter's science project, our dog's vet appointment, whether the roof repair guy had ever called back. It all sounded like a marriage. It just didn't reconcile like one. I started noticing the way you notice a client's numbers before you know what's wrong with them. Not one glaring error, just a texture that feels slightly off. A hotel receipt he mentioned once in passing, for a property that wasn't the one in his expense report. A client dinner that ran until 1 a.m. on a Tuesday, for a client he'd told me 2 months earlier had already signed and closed. A weekend wrap-up call that somehow required him to stay an extra night at a hotel, alone, 400 miles from any office he'd ever set foot in. I didn't confront him. I want to be honest about why, because I think people expect a different answer than the one I have. It wasn't fear. It was method. In my work, the worst thing you can do is accuse someone before your numbers are airtight. You tip your hand, they shred the file, and you're left with a feeling instead of a finding. I have never once built a case on a feeling. So I did what I do at work. I opened a file. Not a folder in a drawer, a spreadsheet, the kind I build for clients, with columns for date, location, stated reason, and anything that didn't match. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't tell my sister, who would have wanted to key his car in the parking lot of wherever he was staying. I told no one. I just filed and waited. The way you wait when you already suspect the number at the bottom of the page is going to be wrong, and you'd rather know for certain than guess out loud. It was a Thursday night in April when the files stopped being abstract. I was in bed, scrolling the way you do when you're not really looking for anything, when Instagram put a photo in front of me from an account I didn't follow, a friend of a friend, some algorithmic suggestion. A woman I'd never met captioned "Best girls' trip in years." Behind her, unmistakable, was a lobby, marble floors in a checkerboard pattern, a fountain shaped like an open hand, a chandelier made of what looked like 100 small glass leaves. I had seen that chandelier before. David had sent it to me himself 3 weeks earlier, from what he'd called the conference lobby in Denver. Her caption said, "Scottsdale." I sat with that photo for a long time before I did anything with it, long enough that the screen dimmed twice and I had to tap it awake again. Scottsdale, not Denver. Same chandelier, same fountain, same checkerboard floor. A lobby doesn't relocate itself 600 miles because a man needs an alibi. So either David had lied about where he was, or I was looking at a coincidence expensive enough to build a hotel chain around. I don't believe in coincidences that large. I never have. It's an occupational hazard. That night, I built a new tab in a spreadsheet I already kept for our household expenses, and I gave it a name that meant nothing to anyone but me. Vendor verification. Column A, date. Column B, what David told me. Column C, what I could independently confirm. Column D, discrepancy notes. It looked exactly like the file I'd use to catch a company skimming its own inventory, because that is exactly what it was. The woman from the photo, I'll call her the first thread, had a public account, no privacy settings, no caution at all. That's the thing people don't understand about proof. It's rarely hidden. It's posted, tagged, geolocated, and captioned with 3 exclamation points, because the person posting it has no idea they're a witness to anything. She had 11 photos from that trip. 1 of them had a timestamp. 3 of them had the location tagged to the hotel by name. I wrote it all down. April 9th through 12th. Same 4 days, David told me he'd be in Denver for a vendor summit. I didn't stop there because one thread doesn't make a case. One thread is a coincidence with a nervous system. I started doing what I do at work when a single anomaly turns up in a client's books. I widened the search. If this was a pattern, it wouldn't be isolated to one woman, one weekend, one hotel chain. Patterns repeat because people don't think of themselves as evidence. They think of themselves as being on vacation. So I went back through David's calendar, the shared one, the one he'd stopped bothering to hide anything from because he assumed I only used it to check when he'd be home for dinner. And I pulled every out-of-town trip going back 14 months, 19 trips, 19 rows in column A. Then I searched, hotel by hotel, city by city, the way I'd search a vendor's name across a decade of invoices, looking for it to surface somewhere it shouldn't. It took me 6 evenings after he'd gone to bed, laptop brightness turned all the way down. Sitting in the guest room, I told him I was using to get organized for tax season. That part, at least, was true. I was organizing something. The second thread showed up on my 4th evening, and it made my hands go still in a way the first one hadn't. Her account was smaller, more private, but she'd posted a single photo, no caption beyond a location pin, and the location pin was for a hotel in Nashville. Same brand as the Denver one, same 3.5-star tier, same restrained corporate elegance, if you can call carpet patterns elegant. The date stamped in the photo's metadata, which I checked because I always check the metadata, put her there on the exact week David told me he'd be at a logistics conference in Kansas City. Kansas City and Nashville are 600 miles apart. I looked it up. I wrote it in column D anyway, because writing down what you already know is still the job. 2 women, 2 hotels, same chain, 2 trips, each one contradicting a different city he'd told me he'd be in. I sat back from the laptop and looked at the spreadsheet the way I'd look at a client's ledger right before I call a meeting. Not with anger, not yet, just a kind of clean recognition. Something had been running underneath our marriage for over a year, quietly, the way a slow leak runs under a floor before anyone sees the stain on the ceiling. I didn't cry. I want to say that plainly because I think people expect me to have cried. I closed the laptop, turned off the lamp, and lay in the dark doing the thing I'm best at, which is math. 19 trips, 2 confirmed, 17 to go. I didn't know yet that there was a third woman, or that she would be the one careless enough, or confident enough, to tag the room number itself. I told my sister on a Sunday over coffee, in the kind of voice I'd use to report a variance to a client. Flat, sequenced, no adjectives doing work they hadn't earned. 2 women, 2 hotels, 19 trips, 17 unaccounted for. Meg didn't say anything for a moment. Then she put her mug down harder than she needed to. "You've known this for 2 weeks, and you haven't said anything to him?" "I've known part of it for 2 weeks," I said. "I don't have all of it yet." Meg has never once in her life waited for all of anything. She wanted to call David right there, on speaker, and ask him to explain Nashville. I understood the impulse. I even respected it. But an accusation, without a complete file, is just a feeling with a deadline, and feelings don't hold up when the other side has had time to build a story around them. "Not yet," I told her. She didn't like it. She told me so, more than once, over the following weeks, that I was being too careful, too clinical, that any normal person would have already thrown a suitcase at his head. I let her be angry. Anger is a luxury I'd decided I couldn't afford yet, not because I didn't feel it, but because it spends the same currency I needed for the work. What Meg did instead, eventually, was help. She works in HR for a logistics company and understood corporate expense systems better than I'd expected. She was the one who told me that most hotel chains, including David's chosen 3.5-star brand, run a public-facing loyalty program page, one that, if you know a member's public display name, will show trip badges, tier status, sometimes even property check-ins, all visible to anyone who knows where to look. David had signed up for that loyalty program using our joint email years earlier, Back when we still tracked points together for a real vacation we never took, I still had the login. Meg sat next to me at my kitchen table while I opened it, the two of us quiet the way you get quiet in a hospital waiting room, waiting for a result neither of us was going to like. The account pulled up 19 stays. 19, matching 1 for 1, the trips already sitting in my spreadsheet. "This is enough," Meg said. "This is more than enough. Call him tonight." "Not yet," I said again, softer this time, because I could see it cost her something to hear it twice. "I want the third piece. I want something that isn't a coincidence anymore, something with a name on it." She didn't understand why a receipt wasn't already a name. She would in 3 weeks, when the third woman posted a photo she never should have tagged. I found her on a Tuesday, a public account, careless in the specific way people are careless when they think no one is auditing their happiness. A photo from the same hotel chain, same week David told me he'd be in Phoenix for supplier onboarding. In the comments, a friend asked which room they'd gotten. She'd answered without thinking twice. Room 412. I wrote it in column D and sat with it longer than I'd sat with anything else in that spreadsheet. If you're watching this, tell me honestly. What would you have done with that number? Confronted him that night? Called a lawyer in the morning? Said nothing at all? The way I'd said nothing for weeks? I'll tell you what I actually did. But first, subscribe, because what happens next is the part nobody expects. Room 412. It sat in my spreadsheet for a full day before I did anything with it, because a number by itself isn't proof. It's a lead, and I've learned the hard way not to confuse the two. What I had, waiting quietly in a shoebox in the closet since our accountant recommended I keep 6 months of statements for tax purposes, was the corporate card David's company issued him for travel. He didn't know I still had access to the paper statements that arrived at our house before he'd switched everything to digital. He'd been so careful about his phone, his email, his search history. He had never once thought about the mail. I pulled the statement for that week in April. 3 lines caught my eye immediately, the way a wrong subtotal catches your eye after years of finding them. A room charge, 1 night, at the hotel chain in question. A parking validation, dated the same day. And a room service charge, placed at 11:47 p.m., itemized in a way most people never bother to read. 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine, a dessert split, apparently, in half. David had told me that same night that he'd eaten alone and gone to bed early. He'd texted me a photo of a room service tray with 1 plate on it, cropped, I now understood, with more intention than I'd given him credit for. I called the hotel the next morning, not as his wife, but the way I'd call a vendor during an audit, polite, procedural, asking to confirm a charge for expense reconciliation purposes, which was, technically, true. I asked which room the order was delivered to. The woman on the phone, without hesitation, confirmed it. Room 412. That was the moment the ledger balanced. Not with anger, not with tears, with the particular quiet that comes when every column finally agrees with every other column, when a number you'd suspected for months stops being a suspicion and becomes a fact you could defend in front of anyone. 3 women, 3 hotels, 1 room service tray built for 2, cropped down to look like 1. I didn't confront him that week either. I want to be honest about that because I know how it sounds. I wasn't protecting him. I was choosing the room. An audit doesn't end with a phone call. It ends with a meeting, a room where the person across the table has no warning, no lawyer, no story prepared, and every document already laid out in the order it needs to be read. I knew exactly which dinner I wanted that to be. I chose his business partner's dinner on purpose. Greg and his wife hosted a small anniversary dinner every June, the same restaurant every year, the one with the white tablecloths and the salmon I never finish. David loved these dinners. He got to be the version of himself he performed best in front of an audience. Generous with the wine list, quick with a story, the kind of husband other men's wives complimented on the ride home. I knew that if I was ever going to lay everything on a table without him turning it into a scene, it would have to be somewhere a scene cost him something. I spent the 2 days before that dinner the way I spend the 2 days before presenting findings to a client's board, reviewing every document until I could recite it without looking. The loyalty program printout, the corporate card statement with its 3 telling lines highlighted in yellow, the 3 photographs printed at the same size, cropped to show only what mattered, a chandelier, a fountain, a room number typed into a stranger's comment section. I put them in order, not the order they happened in, the order that would make the fewest allowances for doubt. David never noticed the folder in my bag. Why would he? In 12 years, I had never once brought a folder to dinner that wasn't full of coupons or somebody's birthday card. He was in good form that night, better than good. He told Greg's wife a story about a client dinner in Denver that had gone until midnight. A story I now knew was built entirely out of a room service tray for 2. Somewhere around the second bottle of wine, Greg made an offhand comment about how much David traveled, and David just smiled that smile I used to find charming and said the line I'd heard 100 times, the one he pulled out whenever anyone questioned the shape of his life. "You know, I'd never do anything to jeopardize what we've built." He said it to Greg. He said it really, to me the way he always did, casually, like a fact so obvious it barely needed stating. I felt something settle in my chest, cold and completely still, the opposite of what I imagine most people feel in that moment, not rage, certainty. I waited. 4 seconds, maybe 5, until the table's laughter had fully died down and dessert plates were being cleared, because timing, like everything else in this, was not something I was willing to get wrong. Then I reached into my bag, took out the folder, and set it beside his water glass, unopened, the way you'd set down an invoice you already know is correct. "Before dessert," I said, "I want to show you something. It's about Denver." He laughed, first. Of course he laughed. He didn't know yet that I wasn't asking him a question. I opened the folder to the first page, the chandelier, the fountain, the checkerboard floor, and slid it across the tablecloth until it stopped in front of him, exactly the way I'd pictured it 3 weeks earlier, lying awake, doing the math. He looked at the photo for a second too long before he understood what he was looking at. "That's just a lobby," he said. "Every hotel has a lobby like that." "It does," I agreed, "but not every hotel has this fountain. It's custom. The chain only installed it in 4 properties. You sent me this exact photo from this exact lobby and told me it was Denver." I turned to the second page before he could answer. The Nashville photo, geotagged, time-stamped, sitting next to a printed line from his own expense report, Kansas City, logistics conference, same 4 days. "Kansas City and Nashville are 611 miles apart," I said. I checked. I always check. Greg had gone very quiet across the table. David's wife compliment smile was gone entirely now, replaced by something tighter, something trying to calculate its way out of a room it hadn't realized it had walked into. "Rachel, this is—" "I'm not finished." I laid the 3rd photo down. The comment thread beneath it, printed in full, the friend's question, and the answer underneath it in the mistress's own words. Room 412. Then beside it, the corporate card statement, the 3 lines I'd highlighted in yellow months earlier, the room charge, the parking validation, and the room service order placed at 11:47 p.m., 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine, 1 dessert, split. "You told me you ate alone that night," I said. "You sent me a photo of the tray. 1 plate, you said. I still have the picture, if you'd like to compare it to what the hotel actually delivered to room 412 at 11:47. He didn't ask to see it. That, more than anything, told me he already knew what it would show. "I called the hotel," I continued, in the same voice I'd used to walk a client through a discrepancy in their books. No heat in it, no performance, just sequence. I confirmed the room number myself. 412. Same room, same night, same charge. I'm not asking you anything, David. I already have the answer. I'm just telling you that I have it. He tried the number defense first, the way people always do when the math turns against them. It's not what it looks like. It could have been a colleague. Room service brings extra sometimes. Sentences that didn't reconcile with each other, let alone with the receipts sitting between the breadbasket and his untouched wine. I let him finish every one of them. I always let people finish. It's easier to show someone their own contradictions when you have all of them, not just the first one they offer. Greg's wife had stopped pretending to look at her phone. Greg himself was staring at the corporate card statement with the particular horror of a man realizing his own company's card had paid for it. You know, I'd never do anything to jeopardize what we've built, David said finally, quieter now, reaching for the line one more time like it still had currency. I looked at him for 4 seconds, maybe 5. You're right, I said. You didn't jeopardize it, you itemized it. Nobody at the table said anything for a long moment. I didn't need them to. The folder said everything I needed it to say, in his own handwriting, his own card number, his own words, laid out in an order that left nothing standing. I closed the folder, then calmly I asked Greg to pass the dessert menu. He didn't finish his own dessert order. I remember that clearly because it was such a small, ordinary thing to notice in a moment that wasn't ordinary at all. He just stopped mid-sentence, set down the menu, and looked at me like he was waiting for the rest of the punishment to arrive. It didn't come the way he expected. "Rachel, please," he said, low enough that Greg had to lean forward. "You know I'd never do anything to jeopardize what we've built." 3rd time. I'd counted, the way I count everything. "You already said that tonight," I said. "It didn't reconcile the first time either." He tried a few more sentences after that, about pressure, about feeling invisible in ways he'd never mentioned to me in 12 years of marriage, about how it wasn't what it looked like, a phrase that had stopped meaning anything the moment I found the second hotel. I let each one land, and let each one fail on its own, the way an executive's excuses fail once you've already shown the board the ledger. There was nothing left for me to argue. The numbers had already done that. What I offered him instead wasn't forgiveness. I want to be clear about that, because I know how the word calm gets mistaken for the word soft. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," I said. "The filing goes in Monday. You can be part of that conversation, or you can read about it in a letter. Those are the only 2 versions available." I looked at Greg, not unkindly. "I also think you should know what that corporate card was actually used for in April. I have the statement, if your accounting team wants to see it." Greg didn't say anything, but the look he gave David told me he already understood exactly how that conversation was going to go on Monday morning, long before any lawyer got involved. I didn't raise my voice once. I didn't need to. I've built my whole career on the idea that the strongest position in any room is the person holding the documents, not the person holding the volume, and that night proved it more thoroughly than any client ever had. I stood up, thanked Greg's wife for a lovely dinner, and left David sitting at a table with 3 photographs, a highlighted statement, and a room number he could never again claim was a coincidence. 6 months later, I don't keep a vendor verification tab anymore. I don't need to. My calendar reconciles with itself now, every single week, because there's only one name on it. The spreadsheet still exists, technically. I never deleted it. But I moved it into an archive folder months ago, the way you box up a case file once a client's books are finally clean, and I haven't opened it since. My daughter and I live in a smaller house now, one with a kitchen table I've never once needed to clear off for evidence. I still notice details the way I always have, a receipt that's $1 short, a date that doesn't line up, but there's nothing underneath any of it anymore. No second column, no discrepancy notes, just a life that finally reconciles with itself. I think about those 3 women sometimes, none of whom ever knew they were witnesses. None of them meant to hand me anything. They just lived their lives out loud, the way people do, and left the pieces where I could find them. I didn't need to raise my voice, I just needed to keep good records. If you've ever found your own version of that room number, a text, a receipt, a date that wouldn't add up no matter how you turned it, tell me about it in the comments. I'd like to know I wasn't the only one keeping score.